Okay, so I have to change something in my API, which is get mapping. I have to add this home path so that once this URL is accessed, I do not get white label, I get something in return. So now I have added this endpoint, small one. This just represents the home, the root directory, the root access, the root URL. And when this is accessed, I am returning something instead of not returning anything last time. And this is the one important thing when you want to use AWS Elastic Beanstalk. Okay, because Elastic Beanstalk, to check the health of the application, it always tries to access the root, and the root is returning anything other than 200, it shows severe error, it fails to start the application. So this is an important step you need to have. Fine. So I have it now. Okay. Second thing is the server port. Right now my server port is pointing to 9000. Okay, but that is not what I would need eventually, because in Elastic Beanstalk we have a reverse proxy setup, something called as Nginx reverse proxy API gateway, understand like API gateway, and it takes the request of the HTTP in a URL, fine, whatever is a public URL, receives it at port 80, but then it routes it to the application internal port of 5000. That's the default setting. We can go and change that, but let's not go into those details of changing it. Rather, let's adapt our application so that our application, when it runs, it listens the requests on port 5000. Okay, so there are again two ways of doing it. Either I go and change it here, or I can also go and change it directly in the Elastic Beanstalk stock configuration or environment properties. So maybe let's do that instead of changing it here. So first change I have done here is simple, which is if I go to controller, I have all I've done is added a get mapping pointing to my root, and I'm returning something here. And this by default, since I'm returning a Springboard automatically returns at 200 here. Fine. Now I'll go back to my Elastic Beanstalk. From here, I go and create an application, which I already did. Or did I? Let me go and create it again. Let's see. No, I haven't created. So I go and create a create application. I say employee API. Okay. You can leave tags as it is. I go here, click on create, and my application is created. And the next thing I need to do is I need to create an environment. So I'll go here, click on environment, and here I will keep this few of the default settings. There are a hell lot of settings here. Let's not mess around with most of them. I will just show you what is the minimum you need to do rather than playing around with other settings, which you of course do. Feel free to do it. But in the first attempt, when you want to make something up and running for the first time, let's go with the default values rather than playing around too much. So I have web server environment. Here the application name is coming by default, fine. The environment name here is coming as employee API environment, okay. Domain name, I can leave it as it is. It can generate a unique value, or rather, if I want to provide something, I will, let's say, provide this, and I can check the availability. The employee API US East 1 elasticbeanstalk.com is available. Okay, so this is the URL which will listen to the client request. So if I navigate this URL to the browser being a client here in my case, it will listen to it at port 80. By default, it listens to port 80, and then internally it will route it to Springboard application on 5000 port number. Okay, so that is basically is what's going to happen eventually. But let's proceed with the next steps. So now from, if I come here, I need to choose a platform. So I go here, what platform I am onto? I am onto Java, right? So I click on Java. Because my application runs on a Java environment, and the platform name here automatically is populated as Corito 17, running on Amazon Linux 2. What this does is it go and create an instance in EC2. So Elastic Beanstalk is not really an infrastructure layer. It is an abstraction layer, a logical layer, which does the underlying infrastructure setup for us. Okay. It creates EC2 instances, create load balancers and all these things. But we don't have to worry too much about it because we are relying on Elastic Beanstalk to create all those underlying resources for us so that we don't have to create it. And that's the reason I'm using Elastic Beanstalk, because it's so less to configure that it's very easy for any new guy, any rookie can come here and create the and deploy their API with very simple configurations. So all I have to do now here is Java, because it's my Spring Boot application. So I have set Java here, put Java 7 Corridor 17 running on Amazon Linux 2. Fine. And now the next step, which is application code, which is the most important thing, because I will need to tell what application will go and run here. Right? So I can use a sample application, because if you're doing for the first time, you can go with the sample application. It will deploy Nginx application there. But we don't want to go sample application because we do have an application code. So I would like to upload that code to the Elastic Beanstalk so that I could run it. What I have to do now is I have to click on local file. I have to give a version label. Don't forget this, otherwise it will throw an error later. So I'm saying what version this upload is. So I'm saying version 1, and I have an option to choose and upload a local file, right? So when I click on choose file, this is where I need to provide my employee where it go. Again, I have to go inside. Let me find it. This is my doctor everywhere. Let me sort it by name, and let me sort it again. Sorry. So if I go to employee Spring Boot application, this is the one. Okay. Now here, if you remember, uh, I did do a Maven clean install here, or did I? Okay, I did not. So I have to go and click on, I'll do that. So I will say Maven clean install -d skip test. I don't want to run my test at the moment. So I'll say -t click install skip test. And what it will do in turn is create my application in the target. It is also saying that it has created it in the target here. And this is my application, employee Spring Boot API 0.0.1 snapshot.jar. Okay, this is the application I need to upload to my Elastic Beanstalk. Okay, so I'll go here and click on this one, click on open. And this will upload my jar. And my jar has what? My jar has the full Spring Boot application, which listens to port 9000 at the moment. But I need to override this, because that's what I said, that my application will listen to this URL in the browser or any client who calls it on HTTP protocol, and it listens here and it transfers or redirects the request to port 5000, server port 5000 automatically. So I want to change, I can change that, but I can go here and change it here, or I can configure directly in the Elastic Beanstalk configuration page, and there will be a small segment which will come where I would get the option to fill that details. But for now, this is all I need. Presets, leave it as it is. I'm saying free tier eligible. This is what I was mentioning earlier, that in EC2 instance, there are free tier available. Make sure you use the free tier and not the other ones, because if you do, then your credit card will be charged based on the usage. So make sure you do not make mistakes while you use AWS cloud, because remember, your credit card is still there, and if you leave something up and running of high configuration, it will start charging you money. So be very wary of what you're using and how you're using, and make sure if you're using something, make sure you delete it after you have done the experiment and all. So for now, I'm using free tier eligible, which is of no problem, because even if I keep it running, it is still free tiers. I won't be charged any money. Then I go to next. Okay, then it will ask me for a few things. I already have some existing service roles and EC2 instance roles. What are roles? I will not go into details, but understand these as a permissions, right? Permissions which Elastic Beanstalk needs to create resources in AWS. In AWS, whatever you do in AWS, they are all called as resources. So EC2 is a resources, security profile, different services having different permissions. So all these things are resources, and there has to be permission attached to those resources for any service to do anything. So this is all about these roles, and service roles are all about permission level, and you can also see few details here. So there are different permission levels provided here. Something on S3 bucket, something on CloudWatch logs. If you're very new, which most of you would be if you're watching this, right? So if these settings, you don't have to go into too much details at the moment. Let's keep it simple. So for now, understand these as a permission model, which Elastic Beanstalk requires for to create resources in your AWS Cloud Platform account. Okay. If you're doing it for the first time, then you better go and click on create and use new service role. So when you do this, it will create and automatically create new roles and attach it with this application. Because I have already done it a few times, I will use the existing service role. Okay, and that's it. And then I go to next. Here, don't touch anything. Leave the default values as it is. Don't try to experiment here for now. Okay, just keep it like this, and then simply say next. Okay, again here, everything remain as it is, nothing to change. Click on next. Fine. Once you come here at the bottom, you will get something called as environment properties. And this is where I was mentioning we need to modify something, which is the server port, because by default my application runs on server port 9000. I don't want it because when some application runs here, the URL will route my request to port 5000. So I need to add this as a value here. I will say server port as 5000, and this will override my value, which is coming from here. So my application will then start listening to 5000, and whatever is being sent from the client, that is from the browser back to the API, it will be redirected to port 5000, which is where my application will also listen to those requests. And then I click on next. So this is another important step which you want to do before you actually deploy something on your Elastic Beanstalks. Okay, so two changes in general. Uh, one is you need to have a get mapping for your root so that Elastic Beanstalk automatically hits this and see if the 2000 is returned. And second is server port 5000. Okay, click on submit. Actually, that's it. That's all you need to do. So this is very straightforward, simple way of deploying any Spring Boot application or any application for that matter. It supports Go, it supports JavaScript, supports Node, Python, all those things. So you can use this to deploy your application. I'm using this to deploy my Spring Boot application. Let's see what happens next. What happens next is um, it will start creating it. So what it is doing internally is it is trying to spin up with lot of resources, right? Something which would make our lives easy so that we don't have to do those things ourselves. It is creating an S3 bucket, uploading the course in S3 bucket, creating the permission roles, assuming the roles. Then it is going and starting the EC2 container. It is also creating the security group, which is nothing but a sort of a firewall. Then it is going back to creating an EC2 instance, and you can see that here. So if I go back to EC2, this is where my new instance is being spinned up automatically by the Elastic Beanstalk. So Elastic Beanstalk is actually doing it for us. Let's see if it has started doing that now. No, there's still only 4 at the moment. Let's come here. So it is still in the process. It has created the security group. Now it is creating something called EIP, Elastic IP. Okay, still no sign of EC2 spin up. Now we got it. Okay, so if I go here, employee API environment instance is being created. It's saying it is initializing. So what's happening is Elastic Beanstalk is actually going ahead and creating the server for me, the cloud server for me. Anything on the cloud, the single unit is an EC2 instance. That is what Elastic Beanstalk is creating. So Elastic Beanstalk is It's just a service which runs on top of AWS, so that AWS resources can be handled with ease without having without user without having user to put in all the details and configurations. It manages things for you, and that's the reason we are deploying our Spring Boot application using Elastic Beanstalk. Okay, let's see if I refresh this further, waiting for these instances to launch. Let's see where it is. It is initializing. If I refresh this again, still reinitializing. If I go here and I could actually see the details, this is my public IP4 DNS URL of this, but I don't want this because my API is actually running on this domain, this URL. If I click here, nothing yet because my server is not up. Then I think server is getting up. Nginx is displayed here. Let's see if this works. Meanwhile, I can show you, meanwhile it runs, let me show you the other application which I deployed. So other application which are of our interest is these three APIs: Appointments API, Doctors API, and Employee API. This is what I deployed earlier. Let me show that. So if I go here and click on this one, this is up and running. Appointments API, US East 1, Elastic Beanstalk. As I said, that get URL is important because this is how Elastic Beanstalk checks whether my application is up and running, and then I can go to its Swagger. So I can go Swagger UI like this, and it displays things here. And if I go to get, try it out, execute, it is giving me results. And you see from where these results are coming. These results are coming from my MongoDB running on the cloud as well. So this is my cloud database. This is where all my details of different data and documents and collections are present. So appointments have 20, doctors have around 6 records, and whatever I'm doing from here, it is actually returning the same thing. Okay, the same thing goes with the other Elastic Beanstalk thing. So if is it running now? Yeah, now my employee API is also up and running. So if I go to EC2, initializing, I refresh this, it is now fully, should be maybe still initializing, I don't know why, but my application is up and running. Okay, my application is up and running. I can go to my swagger-ui .index.html, and this should show me my Swagger UI for employee. So my application is now up and running here also. Let me see if this is working. If I go to get, okay, so I have all the details here. Here, it is the database is still here, which is on H2 database. It is not, this specific API is not interacting anywhere, but my other APIs, which are actually here, are all deployed there and interacting with the external database, which is MongoDB, which is actually this one. So all the details are going there, okay? And they are also interacting with each other also. So if I go back here to my Open API appointment, this is my appointment one. This is my doctor API, which is also running in cloud, which is actually here. If I go to applications, doctor API, come here. Okay, I can click this one. This is my doctor API. I do Swagger. Okay, if I go and create a new doctor, for example, if I go to post, try it out, ID, let me not put it. Let's say, what kind of doctor I can put here? Charles, for example. Let's say I'm putting name as Charles, and let's other thing be as it is. Okay, and click on execute. It has created it. And if I go to my, just to validate whether it really has created, I go to my doctors and let's see that thing has come here or not. It is refreshing, and let's see, is Charles here? Yeah, it is here. Okay, so I have deployed, just to summarize again, I have deployed my application on Elastic Beanstalk from where I got a URL. This is actually connected to the backend which is my database, which is actually here. Okay, and this database is storing and connected with my backend application API, and doing the transactions of getting and posting and updating the results using my microservice, which is here. Okay, the last part here is I can also go ahead and deploy my front end. So my front end here, as of now, is written in Vue.js. I can actually go and show you that also. So if I go here and I will say npm run dev, this will run my front end, a very basic front end. Right now, if I go click on inspect console, network, and if I simply say get appointments, click on here, it is still going and trying to reach out to let me see, to the local host appointment, but I don't want it because now I want my front end also to be connected to the backend. Even though my front end is still on the local host, which is local, I can still connect it to my actual backend running on the cloud. How? I already have the URLs, right? I do have the URLs. All I would do is I will go and change these values from here to these, because I want to run them on for my uh, I want to point them to the appointment, to the external URL, which is external, which that is my application running on the cloud. Let me make it right. I think this is not right. Okay, fine. Okay, and now if I do this again, if I say get doctors, inspect, okay, network, get list of doctors. So now if you see, it is trying to go to this URL, which is actually the same one which I deployed earlier, this one, and it has returned the details and showing all those things here. So you see charts I just created, it has also showing that it's fetched it from the backend. The API, I called the API from here. API went to database running on the cloud, Mongo Atlas. From there, it fetched it and showing it back to the back to my front end. Okay, so this is basically how this deployment of your backend works on Elastic Beanstalk. Elastic Beanstalk also supports Docker, but to what makes sense is if you have Dockerized application, different services, different services built as Docker images, it makes sense to run them on a real Docker orchestration, which is in AWS context called as Elastic Kubernetes Service. But that, as I said, was a bigger beast, so we didn't want it to go there directly. It's better we deploy our application in a simpler way, and Elastic Beanstalk gives you that mechanism rather than directly jumping onto the Elastic Kubernetes services. Okay, so even though our application is Dockerized, right? Our application is Dockerized. We have created Docker files for it. Okay, they are going directly to the Docker Hub. We are building it and we are pushing it to Docker Hub. We have a GitLab pipeline which creates these Docker images and pushes it to the Docker Hub. But still we are not using to deploy them, and we eventually will have to, because Docker images has to run on a orchestration platform like Kubernetes. But as I said, it may become more complicated, so better before we jump into that direction, it's better instead of deploying the Docker images, we deploy the jar files. That's what we did. So we did not deploy the Docker images, rather we deployed the jar files directly in Elastic Beanstalk.